for that is the indicator of it is net foreign debt, and that's the indicator of the GFC. If you want to know how badly you're affected by it, have a look at your net foreign debt, how much you have to borrow from other countries. So we knew quite a bit about that. And if you wanted one word to describe the cause of the GFC, it is fraud.
Yes.
If you wanted two words, it is bank fraud. So, and, you know, the United States government sued, arguably, one of the biggest banks in the world, First National City Bank, it used to be, now called Citigroup.
Yeah.
They sued them for fraud before the class action boys could swing into action, and in America that's about 2 microseconds. And yet the federal government got there first and sued for fraud. It cost them $48 billion to settle it, and then the bank went broke, and guess the same people who'd been the victim of fraud, namely the people of America.
They bailed them out.
They bailed them out.
Oh, wow. That's unbelievable.
It is. Well, it's unbelievable, except it did happen.
Now, there is a fraud case. I can't call it a fraud, because there are regulations as to what we can say about this, but it's a chapter in Australian history that you probably won't find on the internet, because I've looked for it, and I can't find any reference to the famous bad back case of the 1970s. Do you remember that one?
The bad bank?
It was a bad back. It was alleged that many Greek people out here were claiming for a bad back when they actually didn't have bad backs, and they were taken to court, and the case was thrown out. So we were no longer allowed to talk about the Greek back syndrome. But I tell you what, they've just discovered in Greece, a whole lot of taxi drivers are claiming benefits for being blind. The island of Zakynthos, long known for its Venetian ruins and turquoise waters, lately has new fame in Greece, says Today's Australian, as the island of the blind. They've discovered that about 1.8% of the island's population of 39,000 claimed blind benefits last year, but this is about 9 times the prevalence of blindness estimated for many European countries in a 2004 study. Even the taxi drivers were claiming a blind benefit. And it just brought back memories for me of that famous case that we're really not allowed to go into on air, even though it's disappeared down the black hole of old history. Even the internet doesn't know.
Well, I remember it, but it's very vague, and I would never have recalled it if you didn't prompt me, but I do remember it. It was in the papers, and if you read the papers, even if you weren't very interested in it, you sort of knew it was there. But a very small issue financially compared with the ones that have put Australia into debt.
Yeah.
And I know I've said this to you before, but you can't have enough of your panel of expert listeners do one Google thing, and that is go in and look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics September quarter increase in Australia's net foreign debt. That's the difference between the amount we lend to other countries and the amount we borrow from them. It went up by $54 billion in one quarter, and there is no bigger contributor to it, although there's one line ball with it, which is the ineffectiveness of our public service. But that's very, very big. The biggest contributor to it is excess bank profits.
Wow.
Because what the extra profits do is fuel consumption. All the employees and Ralph with his $20 million salary can consume a bit with that. There's no extra production. They're just gouging more money out of an almost fixed, almost non-growing population, especially in terms of its consumption. And it's not so much the fueling of consumption that does the damage. It's the poor buggers that pay the money produce less. If you're a wheat grower, or we used to have people who made motor cars and things like that, but they've all gone. So most of the wheat growers, by the way. And I was just looking today. I was the first person to trade wool in large quantities as principal over the internet, and this is 10, 15 years ago. When I was doing that at the end of the last century, there were 188 million sheep in Australia, and the average cocky under-reports, not over-reports, because you pay your pastures protection fees and things like that on your numbers. Today, there are 68 million.
Whoa.
Didn't we get here on the sheep's back? Doesn't it tell you something?
We did.
Yeah.
But then again, unless we're selling them for chops, the wool has had so much competition from synthetic fibres. Well, obviously, we couldn't continue riding the sheep's back the way we used to before nylons.
Well, you're right about the wool, except that you can eat chops, and they're bloody good. Lamb chops are about the best meat there is. No, look, it's just that they've been rendered financially infeasible because you've got, as I say, the banks are line ball with the bureaucrats. If you're actually out there trying to grow root, you've got 15 government departments that are greener than a watermelon and won't let you graze your sheep on hilly country because it's competing with the weeds.
Yeah.
And, of course, you can't cut the trees down. You can ask Mr. Fletcher, wasn't it, about that?
Yeah.
And by and large, there's just Australia's is a parasite on itself. Our workforce that ought to be producing are effectively either bludging is the polite word or stealing is the more accurate one. They want money for actually producing nothing. And when you put it all together, you go 54 billion further into debt because we certainly haven't stopped consuming. We keep bringing the plasma TVs in.
In 1948, George Orwell, real name Eric Blair, said that humans were the only animals that consume more than they produce. He was right.
Well, I don't know.
And that has a number. It's measured by indebtedness. Consume it now, and your grandkids will probably have to pay it off.
Well, look, it's an interesting discussion. I think he's wrong, is my first reaction, but you can't really consume more than you produce.
I know you're thinking that if I eat, lots of wheat, and the wheat hasn't even been grown, then how can I eat stuff that hasn't been grown? Well, but supposing I do a whole lot of work for you and you don't pay me.
The net position is...
You're consuming my product, but you're not producing in return.
Well, that's fundamental to what I'm saying about how Australia's going into debt. But the big point, the most important point, the planet is not in debt. The planet's dead even. And everything you say supports that. You know this. You don't say...
Although there is some missing money. There's the black economy, and there is the missing money. I just can't remember the name of the guy who wrote this book, Hot Money.
Yeah, I remember that.
25 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah,
and
I do remember.
When they did the numbers, they found the world was running a loss of about 100 billion a year or something.
No, it was
running a deficit with itself.
It was. It was 100 billion, but 100 billion is nothing because all the assets on the planet add up to several $100 billion. So
Jim Naylor, I think, from memory, was the author of that one.
But the important thing is, it's a closed economy. We don't borrow from the moon. If we borrowed $1 trillion, and we're nearly at $1 trillion, we borrowed it from someone who had a surplus. Mostly it was China that had the surplus, but other countries do. And I've seen it published. They won't publish it today because it's all based on percent of GDP and they're concealing it. But when you looked at a graph of every country of the 140 that reported through the IMF, just a bar graph, it was just a big S that in those days, I'm talking 15 years ago, Japan was 6 trillion in net foreign reserves. It was making motor cars and selling to anyone who wanted to drive it. And the United States was that far in debt because they had the world's atomic weapons to look after, and they ran the United Nations, and they're just further in debt now than they were then. And I remember Australia in those days was only about 120 billion in debt. It's a trillion now, or nearly. And the opposite one to us, the one that balanced us, was Taiwan, which has, funnily enough, about the same population. So we were, that much in debt. They were that much with net foreign reserves. And today, China's got 3.2 trillion in net foreign reserves measured in US dollars. If you go around and adjust that for intrinsic value, because everything in China is valued more cheaply than it would be if it was in America, if you make that adjustment, it's roughly double. They're 6.4 trillion in the bank. So we don't really want to be in debt in that world.
All right. R.T. Naylor, it was, not Jim Naylor, R.T. Naylor. Hot Money and the Politics of Debt.
I remember it, and the 100 billion is nothing. It's a sort of a statistical error, a reporting error. It means nothing. That amount of money is...
Okay. I've got to go, Jim.
In the total assets. Thanks, Brian.
As always, nice to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.